those. So welcome to How to Build Trust. This is Rolfe, and in today's session, we'll be looking at how to create a safe space for your mentoring conversations. We'll talk about the behaviours that actually shape trust in one another, and also talk about how to build confidence, your mentee's confidence in you, and also, very importantly, their confidence in themselves. So my definition of a mentoring conversation is one where people are safe to explore their thoughts and their feelings. They can use, and you help them and encourage them and teach them, excuse me, how to use critical, creative, and above all, reflective thinking to gain insight and generate possible options for themselves. Then they make informed choices as they decide on goals and actions. And this place that you build for them, this creative safe space, that you assist them then as needed to plan the way forward, and then support and encourage them as they implement their plan. Just letting someone else into the live webinar. So what do I mean by a safe space? Well, I think it means a physical and emotional environment with no sense of threat. It's a place where there is trust and where the mentee can speak candidly with confidence. So think about what creates a safe space for you. You want to think about a time when you've been very comfortable speaking candidly with someone that you trusted. The times when you felt okay talking about your aspirations and your challenges, and the spaces where you feel safe to share your values and your priorities. Times when you could honestly express yourself. And if you want to share something about, what created that safe space for you, or what were the features of it, or what made it such a space for you, feel free to do that. You can type in the chat box. You can type something that everyone can see there, or you can send a direct message to me and I will read it out without mentioning your name. So you can comment anonymously just by sending a message to me as well. Now, we need to understand, and if you think about this, you will have noticed this happening. It's actually pretty easy that how a look, a word, or a gesture can actually trigger a threat response in someone else. When you're trying to have a confidential conversation, or any conversation for that matter, it is so easy to trigger people these days. I guess it was always so, but I think when people have been under sustained stress, which most of us have the last few years, then our tolerance can, if we're not careful, our threat response is triggered rather more quickly. And part of the reason for that is we actually evolved from ancestors whose very survival depended on their ability to react fast to any threat by defending themselves, running away, or hiding. And you'll know that as the fight, flight, freeze reaction. Today, our evolved brains are nevertheless constantly vigilant. They are actually scanning the environment, just as I'm scanning the people joining us now and letting them in, our brain is constantly scanning the environment, in fact, 5 times per second for any potential threats. And in every interaction we might be having, the brain is asking, am I safe? Or is there a threat? And it's that primitive part of the limbic area of the brain there that instantaneously responds. Am I safe here? Is this a safe space? Or is there some threat? And as I mentioned, it could be a look, a word, or some sort of inference they draw. And when the fight, flight, freeze reaction is triggered, hormones actually flood the brain, and it causes us to hear differently, to process differently, and behave differently. In a heightened state of alertness, people tend to become defensive. They are less likely to open up and risk their vulnerability. Okay, I'm seeing some comments coming in there, so keep an eye on the chat box and read what your colleagues are saying as well, and learn from that as well. Okay, in a mentoring conversation, the biggest fears are likely to be judgment, criticism, and ridicule. Can you relate? But the vigilant brain is sensitive to environmental stimuli, things like a large desk, or, the big chair behind the big desk. They're symbols of power and status. A closed door might be a cause for concern with some people. And the limbic area of the brain can't tell the difference. Remember, this was developed in our primitive human forms to react instantaneously. Now, I know we weren't really around when the dinosaurs were on the planet, but you get the picture here. And if you ever watched, the original Jurassic Park or any of those sorts of movies, I bet you jumped out of your seat when the velociraptors were jumping and trying to grab the legs of the people who were trying to, escape from them. If you jump anytime, like have a startle response anytime you're watching something scary on TV or in a movie, that is your limbic brain. Now, your rational brain knows, hey, it's just a movie, it's just a thing on TV, but your limbic brain doesn't know that. It reacts, and you'll know your brain can actually remain hyper vigilant after that sort of experience. Your heart rate's still going, and you might even stay a bit jumpy. The other thing, as I mentioned earlier, people who experience chronic, even low-grade stress, those who are, for example, subject to discrimination, harassment, or are survivors of abuse, are especially primed for a threat response. No matter how mature or able to self-regulate we are, perceived threats affect our ability to communicate. However, there is good news. As well as threat, the brain also responds to what neuroscientists call reward. As social animals, humans' greatest reward comes from our interaction with others. We need relationships and communication. Loneliness is harmful to our health, and solitary confinement is high-level punishment. Now, neuroscientists talk about 5 drivers that create either a threat response or the reward response in our brain. So I'm going to go through those in a moment in a bit of detail for you. I will pause in a moment to acknowledge some of these comments that are coming through, and perhaps to read out some of them for people just watching the recording who won't see them. We can think of these social drivers as levers or even switches. When the lever is in the forward position, the brain perceives reward and safety and can respond with trust. But push the lever the other way and the message is threat, and defenses are triggered. The fight, flight, or freeze response. I'm so grateful to the work of Dr. Norman Chorn and Dr. Terry Hunter of the BrainLink group, who generously shared this information at a live presentation and indeed in some written work since then. So the 5 social drivers that trigger us either into the threat or the reward response, they've come up with an acronym of safety, and the 5 drivers are security, which is a sense of certainty, predictability, stability, autonomy, freedom to decide and choose, fairness, equity, transparency, social justice, esteem, our status in relation to other people, and the recognition and respect that we do or do not receive. Trust in the sense of belonging to a group or a tribe, feeling safe in relationship with others. And so there are the 5 social drivers there that I've listed, and I'm going to go into them in more detail. And each one of these will trigger in each of us either the threat or reward response of the brain. And each of us has a personal priority. So there's one that's a bit of a hair trigger for each of us. All of them do create that response, but one in particular will be your hot button. And as I go through each of these in a bit more detail, I want you to start thinking about, is this your hot button? Is this your hair trigger? Because I'll ask you, I've got a poll coming up for you where we can anonymously compare notes on which one. They're all important. They all do create this response, but one of them is going to have a bit more of an influence on you than the other. So let's talk about security. And we use routines and habits and rules of thumbs to make millions of minor decisions each day. And these are kind of the default settings that allow us to do things without thinking. It's as if the brain's kind of on autopilot. And what this does is free up the executive brain to, or the neocortex, to deal with immediate and important cognitive tasks. Think about when you're driving a car. Now, when you're driving a car, your brain is doing and your body is coordinating most of that on a mental kind of autopilot. And it leaves your executive brain free to check the mirrors consciously, to turn on the indicator, to keep an eye on the traffic in front of you and look for those tail lights that say, you know, I need to slow down now because the traffic is banking up. That keeps an eye on the traffic in the rear view mirror. Oh, this guy's coming up fast. I better get, you know, over to the left lane if that's an option to get out of their way. So your conscious, your executive brain is in the moment making those decisions, while the rest of the driving, which is ingrained, you've built these habitual patterns, you've built muscle memory that let you kind of flick on the indicator and flick on the windscreen wipers. Have you ever jumped in a different car that's got the windscreen wipers and the indicators on the other side? You'll notice automatically you're flicking on the wrong one, and you've got to make that. You've now got to switch back to the executive brain, because you're going to think, oh no, that's not the indicator in this car, that's the indicator. So this makes that distinction for you and the importance of the executive brain there. Okay, so and the brain hates disruption and unexpected things, because switching off that autopilot to use the executive function to process the new data and act deliberately instead of out of habit requires effort, and it uses energy. So security to the brain means routine, ordinary, no surprises. So things like ambiguity, confusion, or unmet expectations will be experienced as threatening, whereas familiarity, clarity, being prepared with similar experience, having clear expectations, being forewarned or briefed about expectations, signal safety. I mean, there's a reason we sit in the same chair at our table for dinner each night. There's comfort in that. It's what's expected. If someone else sits in our chair, then we automatically have a little ruffle there. So that's a little bit about security. Let's look at autonomy. Adults want to be self-directing, and most of my experience in mentoring is dealing with adults. So I'm going to, that may be an incorrect assumption, but I think even if you're dealing with young people, these social drivers would be well developed. And certainly one of the factors of teenagers is this growing sense and desire for their autonomy. Most of us hate rigid rules or being given orders or micromanaged. We resent top-down planning that robs us of input and feels disempowering. These are perceived by the brain as a threat, but reward is experienced when we feel we are in control, when we have independence and choices, or we're able to work in collaboration with other people instead of, being instructed and told what to do. So thinking about, we've covered 2 now, I'm going to move on. Which one presses your hot button? This is my hot button, autonomy. I wonder what it is for you. Okay, fairness. What will push this lever into threat is unfair treatment, injustice, the perception of favoritism, preferential treatment or arbitrary decisions. Reward is experienced when there is transparency, a clear rationale for decisions, and equity. And then finally, the 5th driver is esteem. Now, we instinctively, so unconsciously, understand the importance of status. It's kind of wired into us. High status individuals get more, whether it's food, money, sex, the corner office, the car or parking spot, better assignments at work, generally goes to the higher status people. And the brain constantly evaluates our status in relation to others. Even if our rational brain, our executive function is able to have the confidence to say, I am the equal of everyone here, that limbic brain, that kind of reptilian brain of ours, that primitive brain, is still weighing it all up and looking at our status in relation to others. So feeling judged or looked down on, negative feedback, not winning in a competitive situation, lack of money or having to do the dirty work can lower self-esteem and raise defensiveness. Mastery, that self-efficacy, seeing ourselves as competent, being treated with respect, getting positive feedback, seeing ourselves as competent, being acknowledged and praise are rewarding to us. And praise, as long as it is perceived as sincere. So the final one, this is trust in slightly different context. Think of it as belonging. In this context, belonging means the threat situation is rejection, isolation, and being perceived as difference. And feeling different and socially disconnected are very threatening and cause great pain. And the brain experiences social pain in the same way as physical pain. The neuroscientists tell us the neuro pathways are so close. And it's like physical pain that we experience. So in this sense, trust, or think belonging, it means inclusion, empathy, friendship. This rewards us and brings us closer together. So think about your dominant social driver. They're all important, but usually one is more important than others in each of us. That means it's easier to trigger a brain response to either trust, open up, communicate, or going to that defensive position. So I'm going to start a poll here. And so you can anonymously respond to this poll. So it's a single choice here, only because I know they're all important, and I know many of you would say, well, I'm a bit this and I'm a bit that, but this is kind of one of those forced choice ones. So there are 5 choices there for you. Which is it for you? Okay, most of you have voted now. Just give it a few seconds more. Okay, quick. I'm going to turn it off now, and I'll share those results with you. Okay, so here are the results coming up on your screen now. So you can see it's a pretty close run thing. In fact, it's a dead heat between fairness and that belonging driver. Now, we are by no means a what do you call it, a random sample, are we? Because we're all involved in mentoring, we're all involved in human resources or training or something close to that, and therefore you would expect people to value highly the fairness, that is the equity, transparency and social justice, and the idea of belonging to a group and relationships with others. So I'm not surprised by these results. Now, the reason it's useful to get a handle on this, and I do urge you to go and look up the work of Dr. Norman Chon and Dr. Terry Hunter of the Brain Link group. There's lots more information and articles that you will find very helpful in this area, and really get a handle on your own a dominant driver. And the reason this is important, let me put this poll away. Okay, hopefully you can see my slides again now. Quickly give me feedback if you can't see them. Hopefully you can. But the reason this is important is because whichever one of these social drivers we personally find most rewarding is what we're likely to try and offer most to others. And unfortunately, if there's a mismatch, say I am trying to offer you lots of autonomy and freedom, which is my preference, but you value security, so clear guidelines, certainty. Can you see how that would be a barrier? And this can be something of a cultural experience as well. As I've said, my preferred learning style, communication style is one that offers a lot of autonomy and freedom. You know, when I was running workshops or conferences, I'd put people into groups with a discussion topic. And once I learned more about these drivers, I realized that there were lots of people that really needed far more structure than I was verbally giving them. So I learned very quickly, okay, put a slide up, give them a handout, and make it very clear instructions about what you want people to do, what you want them to come up with, how, you know, how they're going to feed this back, and how much time they've got. Because, you know, that wasn't front of my mind. I was in the moment of the experience. So it's a good lesson. And this can happen to you in mentoring also. So you can't always know. Sometimes you can intuit, or you will find out quickly what your mentees predominant driver is, and you can respond to that as I did with giving structure. But sometimes there's a way that you can develop your communication to kind of hit every checkbox, if you like, so that you've got something for everyone in your conversation until you indeed do have more understanding. So knowing what your dominant driver is lets you be alert to a mismatch, and also lets you tailor your style, your conversations, even your teaching style, as it was for me, to cater for more difference in your audience. So here we are. This is what you need to know in order to create a safe space, so people do not feel threatened, so they can speak up confidently with you. Okay, before we move on, I'm just going to check. Okay, so Jess is saying non-judgmental, positive regard and confidential choice for mentee in how the partnership meeting operates. Yeah, thanks for that, Jess. And who was it? It was a Carl Rogers. Positive regard in all circumstances. So we're not judging the other person. And this is particularly critical in the early stages of building a mentoring relationship. Later on in the relationship, then you may have earned the right and the trust sufficient to offer critique or different points of view. But certainly you need to earn that right by building the trust. Okay, so just looking at some of the comments coming in. Ron is saying, early in my career, I felt in a safe conversation with my boss, when my boss was willing to share their own shortcomings. Yes, a willingness to self-disclose, not oversharing and only what's appropriate in your mentoring relationship, but self-disclosure is a very useful and positive way, reassuring way of building trust. Thanks for sharing that, Ron. Mike saying, when I can share, knowing the content will go no further and will not come up again unless I bring it. Yeah, thanks, Mike. It is, and confidentiality needs to be something you discuss early in your mentoring relationship and reiterate and remind each other of from time to time. Okay, an anonymous one, probably if we can make our mentees smile or laugh, it's also a good sign of trust. Yes, I would agree with that. Thank you. So let's continue on now. I want to talk about behaviours. So what do we do with all of this? Behaviours that drive. Okay, so there are our drivers once again. And I just want to talk briefly about how we can use these in mentoring, what sort of behaviours. So security, autonomy, fairness, and esteem and trust. So one of the things we can do right from the get-go is agree ground rules. That's going to build the security. And it's going to be more important to some than others, but it's useful for everyone in a mentoring relationship, including you as the mentor, having a set of ground rules. Some mentoring programs, and this is one of the best features of being a mentor in a structured program, there will usually be ground rules, guidelines, you know, a code of ethics, this sort of stuff that you and the mentee discuss up front, so you both know what's going on, and you discuss your expectations. What are your goals? What are your do's and your don'ts? And also, and if you've been online with me before, you will know this is one of the things I repeat often: share an agenda prior to the meeting. If you're a mentor, train your mentee to send you an agenda prior to the meeting. And don't want you to get all, you know, bureaucratic about it. It can be as simple as 2 or 3 dot points, 2 or 3 questions that they want to ask, or discuss. You can get into the habit at the end of a mentoring meeting, as you summarize and review what you've talked about in this meeting, you then look forward and say, okay, so what do we put on the agenda for? What do you think our agenda should be for the next meeting? So you can do that collaboratively. Now, it doesn't mean it's carved in stone. It doesn't mean it's not flexible. Indeed, one of your first discussions when you get together for the next meeting might be, okay, we said this was our agenda. Has anything else come up? Or are there some higher priorities on this list of things that we're going to talk about today? So that sort of scene setting, that appeals to the brain's need for security. So autonomy, how do we cater to that? Well, listening more than you speak and asking more than telling. Again, if you've been online with me before, you know this is something I bang on about all the time. And I do talk about applying the 80-20 principle, Pareto's principle to this, especially in the early phases. Again, be flexible. There are times when the mentee wants and needs your input. But if you want to build trust, be clever about asking your questions and responding to what they say in such a way that you draw them out in such a way that they do up to 80% of the talking. Encourage them to make their own decisions. Mentoring is not about you telling them what to do. It's about you helping them decide what is best for them to do. Not what you do in this situation necessarily, but what is best for them to do. Discussing their intentions, actions, and the likely outcomes. This is where you can really add value. You do usually have more experience. You do usually have a more objective perspective on some issue that they might be thinking about. And one of the ways you can bring input into that is by getting them to think about, and if necessary, having some input on possible outcomes of if they choose a particular course of action, because you want them to take responsibility. That is what autonomy is about, taking responsibility. Fairness. How can you build this into any mentoring situation, regardless of the other person's driver? You can use them all using these actions. Having an open mind that sees both sides of an argument, building into your repertoire of language. You can say, well, on the one hand, X, on the other hand, Y, or just drawing in two sides of a situation, at least two or more perspectives, having your own mind open to possibilities. Remember, you are a mentor, so you are a role model for the person. If you model open-mindedness, guess what? They pick it up along the way. So describing situations from different perspectives is something you can do, and be a champion of equity so that you confirm the ideas espoused by equity. Your own behavior, again, models respect and equity. So esteem is important. Treat them as an equal. Okay, you might be the mentor, they might be the mentee, and oftentimes there is a disparity in your levels in the organization or your ages that kind of automatically set your status higher than theirs. However, that does not stop you treating them as a colleague, as an equal, and avoiding patronizing them. So be slow to give advice. In fact, I've got a webinar called Be Slow to Give Advice. If you haven't seen it, it's probably my favorite webinar. I don't say never give advice, only be slow to give advice, even when asked. Your job is to facilitate their thinking and decision making. It's that old saying, give a person a fish, you feed them for a day. Teach them how to fish, and you feed them for a lifetime. So that's what we are doing by facilitating their thinking and their decision-making skills. It raises their own self-esteem, their self-efficacy, their self-confidence, and it recognizes them as a colleague and equal. Feel free to type in your comments and experiences here. I'll pause in a moment. And you will also raise their self-esteem by providing positive feedback and or getting them to reflect and recall their own success. Trust. So remember, in this context, trust is that sense of belonging, inclusiveness. So build rapport with the mentee every time you speak to re-establish the relationship. That may mean a little bit of small talk at the beginning, just to kind of set the scene before you get into the business of the mentoring. You lead the conversation most of the time, but that doesn't mean to say it can't be a two-way conversation. Indeed, it should be a two-way conversation amongst colleagues, again, amongst equals, and you build the rapport again every time. It's like something you've got to do every time. Remind them that conversations are confidential and make sure you keep their confidences. And demonstrate that by not talking about other people also, because, you know, even though you might indulge in a little bit of, gossip there, and you think, okay, no names, no pack drill, but if the very fact that you talk about other people may give the person the hint that, oh, I wonder if they're talking about me to other people as well. So, and this comes back to the point that I think Ron made earlier, being willing to disclose appropriate information about yourself to show you trust them. Now, use this sparingly, because you don't want to minimize your own credibility here, but it really does help, as Ron pointed out, if you can show your vulnerability, or you can show that you have experienced similar things to them, similar feelings, similar experiences. You do have to be careful that the conversation doesn't revolve around you. It can be easy to get carried away. So be succinct in making your points, or sharing, you know, an anecdote about when this happened to you, or an experience that happened to you. Make your point clearly and then flick it back to them. The conversation needs to be about them. Okay, so sorry, just making a little adjustment here so I can see what I'm doing next. Right. Okay. So I just threw this in. I updated it this week, which was quite interesting. This is a survey that the Roy Morgan organisation does every few years, and this was a result of their survey in 2021. The previous information I had went back to 2018, I think. So I think we were probably seeing some of the pandemic influence here, but trust in professions has dropped dramatically, but the basic pattern has stayed the same. This is Australian information, so I apologise to those of you outside of Australia, but you may be able to find similar information on your location from some other organisation. But isn't it interesting? The medical professions nearly, well, pretty much dominate. We've got school teachers in the top 5, and engineers in the top 10. Police just made it up there. And down the bottom, what do we see? The usual suspects there too. So I think that's quite interesting, but it's just there for interest. What I wanted to get onto really was the sorts of behaviours that will help us in mentoring. So when I was researching and thinking most about this in the context of mentoring, I developed this model that's in my books, because every relationship depends on trust. It doesn't matter whether it's spouses or colleagues or family or a team. The level of trust strongly influences success. So what is trust actually? How can we help people trust us more? So some of what develops or destroys trust is actually emotional. Now I put it down here because to remind us of that diagram of the brain, you know, the limbic system, it's down to emotional, instantaneous responses. So some of what builds people's trust in us is going to be an emotional, primitive reaction. If you've got red hair and they've had a bad experience with people with red hair in the past, that's likely to trigger something that's got nothing to do with you, and you won't know anything about it. All you'll know is you've got to work harder to get their rational brain to kick in, to see you as you, not that other person they had the bad experience. And I choose red hair. I apologize to the redheads. It's just an example. So here are the four areas that help us build that trust. Some of it comes down to your credibility. Some of it has to do with your reliability. There's an element of mutuality in the relationship, and also the element of reciprocity. So let me talk about these in more detail. I'll give you a summary at the end again, I think. So credibility, essentially what I mean is the person looks at you and says, I can believe in you. Those we consider trustworthy typically share some characteristics that allow them to establish their credibility with us. We believe in their integrity. So we get a sense that they are honest and congruent. You know, they mean what they say, in other words. We also get a sense that they are capable, they have knowledge, skills, and they inspire confidence. They know what they're talking about. Their information is reliable. They're experienced in their field. Credibility, I can believe in you. The next one is reliability. I can count on you. And a lot of that comes down to performance. They see that you are a person capable of producing results, getting things done, the right things that make for effectiveness. You know, the proof of the pudding is in the eating sort of thing. It's not enough to look good. You've got to fulfill the promise and meet those expectations. And the other aspect is consistency over time. So people who are reliable, they turn up, they meet their commitments, they're on time. So reliability is a factor in developing trust. Then there is this element of mutuality, which essentially means both you and I are going to benefit from this. And this comes down to a person's intent. So we get a sense of this when we feel that people are positive and they care about us, not just themselves. They will act in our best interest. They strive for mutual benefit, not purely self-interest. And I think this is why politicians and salespeople are on the bottom of that list we looked at, or towards the bottom. Advertising, marketing people tend to be down the bottom of that list because they are acting not in our best interest, but to make money and so forth. And the other element in here is motivation. So we get that sense of mutuality from people where motivation is straightforward. They have transparent reasons. So people might say mentoring, I was assisted and I feel like I want to give back. So they have that mutuality. There's no hidden agenda. So then we come to reciprocity. you trust them. Interestingly, people are more likely to trust others when they're on the receiving end of that trust. So you acknowledge, so you pay respect to them, you acknowledge their autonomy and their rights. They will have confidence, and you have confidence and faith in their ability and belief that they will do their part. So you're not doing everything for them. You might help them head in the right direction, and you show that you've got confidence in them to follow through. So there we are. There's our 4 elements that really build trust in you. From my point of view, that's the model I've developed. And I just want to quickly look at some of the behaviours here. I want to get a bit specific again here. So credibility, I believe in you. The factors in that are your integrity and your capability. So the sorts of things that can help you. And look, I'm going to ask you to reflect on this in a moment. Are there any, as you review this list, that maybe you could lift your game a little? Which ones are you particularly good at? Give yourself a 10 out of 10 if you like, but just have a look. Where are your strengths and maybe even some weaknesses here? Because remember, I want you to go away with an action plan from this. So being prepared, being professional in your behavior gives you that credibility. Being on time is a factor in reliability. Never cancel a meeting. I know things come up. Don't cancel, reschedule. Things are going to come up. People respect that. We understand that. But don't just cancel it and leave it at that. Reschedule and make that as quickly as you can if you must readjust. Show you care about the person. This is where the mutuality is. Remember details. And I think one of the benefits of doing kind of online meetings these days is it does give you a chance to kind of run a little cheat sheet and jot some things down if you want to, and help you remember, or just build your memory skills so that when you're meeting the person again, you're remembering the things that they told you. You do a review and that triggers your memory. And tell them that you are getting value from the conversations. Do you know, I've met so many mentors who honestly say at the end of the mentoring program, I think I got more out of this than the mentee. Now, that might not always be the case, but it's my experience that most mentors get a lot out of the mentoring that they do, whether it's a heightened appreciation for younger people, say, or different people, whether it's increasing their communication skills. Maybe it's the ability to keep their mouth shut and really listen well. But there's value there for you. And if you can recognize that there is, share that with them, because that develops that sense of mutuality. And reciprocity, again, the appropriate self-disclosure and giving the person your full attention. As I say this, I realize I didn't turn my phone off and I'm terrified it's going to ring. Okay, so just take a moment now while I do turn that phone off, and just reflect. Is there any areas there that maybe you can lift your performance in? Okay, so let's move into the last short section of this webinar today. And we're looking at the final area of building their confidence. Confidence in you, we've been mainly talking about, but also confidence in themselves. So I love Stephen Covey's concept in his classic 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's one that should be on your bookshelf and one that should be pulled out. It's classic. He's no longer with us, but his lessons were timeless. So I do recommend 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey. And in there, he describes an emotional bank account as a metaphor for the amount of trust in a relationship. You make deposits and withdrawals with your words and with your actions. So to build their confidence in you, and these things, I guess, are going to be fairly obvious, but I'm going to reiterate them anyway, that showing that you care about them, showing your respect for them, giving your full attention, listening, and that 80-20 principle as much as you can. They do 80% of the talking. You listen, you ask questions, you give input when you've earned the right, and you accept rather than judge or critique what they say. You don't have to agree with everything they say, but you can accept it as an opinion, even if you have a different opinion. And then that appropriate self-disclosure. So we want to build their confidence too. And the way we can do that is having conversations that highlight examples of their success in the past. This could include obstacles they've overcome, problems they've resolved, or difficult situations that they managed to get through. Get them to reflect on it. Draw those out, remember them, get them to make a note, discuss the skills, the attitudes, the behaviours that actually brought about that success. Have conversations about how they can use those same attitudes and behaviours and skills in current situations to their advantage. That's why there's never nothing to talk about in a mentoring conversation. If they don't have an agenda or something to focus on today, you can lead a conversation about their past successes. You can draw them out. Now, a lot of people, and again, this can be a cultural thing, very modest about themselves, perhaps not able to see their strengths, to see their potential and their capabilities. So you can use your mentoring conversations focusing on their past successes to draw those out. Get them to make a list of positive achievements to review and get them to add to it often. You know, I have a reminder on my calendar on Fridays that says achievements this week. I confess I don't always do it this time of my life, but it's a really good thing to do, just to review your week and say, okay, what did I actually achieve in all of the important areas, personal areas as well as work performance and so forth? What did I achieve? And add to that list often. It's very good for fending off depression and raising your positivity. And both of these things are extremely helpful when you are putting together resumes and applying for jobs, because these are the things that you need to be able to talk about. And finally, help them set appropriate and achievable goals. A process that enables incremental and realistic expansion of their self-image as an achiever. If they've got a big goal, help them break it down into those smaller chunks, you know, bite-sized chunks, things they can manage. So there you are. We've talked about creating a safe space. So we talked about, and with those 5 social drivers, creating an environment where there is no threat, so they can open up. Talked about the 4 elements that build their trust in you. And finally, talked about building their confidence in themselves apart from anything else. So we've just got a couple of minutes, and I will stick around as long as you'd like. If you want to type in your questions, I'm going to go and review some of the comments and questions as they come in. I would love to hear from you. What are your key takeaways? What are the actions? What are you going to do with this information now? Just a reminder, we've got about half a dozen more webinars. If you're on the live webinar, you will get an invitation, and you can share that invitation with others if you wish. If you're watching the recording, please sign up for your free ebook, and you will get invitations to these live webinars, much better than watching the recording. And I will send you some information a bit later on about the book from which all of the webinars are being drawn this year. So I'm just going to stop the recording, and then I shall start responding to your questions. If you're watching the recording, thanks very much, and hope to see you soon on the live webinar.